We could call the life of man a piece of fiction. You are fiction, your heroes are fiction, your foes are fiction, and so's your whole life. This is extremely strange and cannot be easily understood. But perhaps someday a fiction critic will appear who can explain it. There was one guy you could mention any subject to, and he could take off talking on it for hours. His name was the mind. What a guy. What a subject. What a load of crap. And as always, the mind would have the last laugh if it had half the sense of a staggered goose. The focus of one man's life was directed and regulated by electronic equipment. And everything ran fine except for periodic crashes in the system, at which times all of his memory, scheduling, and monitoring programming would go blank and leave him at the mercy of that mechanical level of life always extant. Time and the mind. The mind runs on time. What you're searching for doesn't. Over and out. There is the life of action and the life of reflection, the life of movement and the life of planning, the life of doing and that of thinking about doing. And while they may sound and seem separate, they are only so if they seem that way to you, which they shouldn't. And the name of that song was, I May Get It and I May Not, but in either case, what difference does it make? Surely a Grammy contender, what? The mind wants to hear carousel songs, not a straightforward description of things, which would act like a wedge, stopping their merry-go-round. One man started off life being pretty pissed, and when he discovered others who were frightened, he traded in being pissed for being frightened. And after being that way for a while, concluded, as unbelievable as it would have sounded beforehand, that there was actually little difference between being the two. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, sometime later, he began to periodically wonder if there was, in fact, something naturally within each of us that is permanent, and that no matter what other things about us may appear to change, it never does. The mind's natural primary interest is in the external world, with introspective reflection on itself a fairly insignificant secondary pastime. In those of the effort, the situation is reversed. One man lived by the railroad tracks and for years complained about the noise. He complained about the noise because the noise bothered him. But when he learned not to let it bother him, he no longer had any complaints about it. Is this too simple a story for us to even concern ourselves with? There is a barrier between man and the understanding of life. And that barrier is his efforts to describe life. The error is not in the specifics presented, but in the attempt itself to explain. One man began to wonder if, in fact began to fear that, words might be a form of narcotics. The fault lies not in the details, dear Brutus, but in the overall effort itself. The truest thing e'er said about life is that which ne'er was said. There was once a world in which the creatures had a gigantic piece of machinery, in which they were all interested. Some admired it, some were frightened by it, some worshipped it, and others disliked it, but all of them, to some degree, were fascinated by it. Yet none were able to comprehend precisely its purpose. Then one day a stranger came by who grasped the nature of the machine and recognized its place in the overall scheme of their planet. But when he tried to explain it to them, he met with very little success. and eventually realized that the design of things on their world was such that the machinery, in spite of the significant part it played, was not meant to be understood. Don't you just love stories with a happy ending? And now another safety reminder from your friends here at the program. The more you think about it, the more it'll bother you. One man's lament: I'm either too empty or else too full. I'm either too tired or too pumped up. I'm either too anxious or else don't care. I'm either too friendly or too pissed off. You know, just looking at myself, I'm a mess. But a pretty regular kind of mess, wouldn't you say? I'm not really sure why we took the time to hear him out on that. The viewer writes, I really like the idea I heard on your show recently about belling the mind. Because in my case, my mind is constantly slipping up on me before I realize what's happening. In fact, sometimes I even, oh, excuse me, I just heard someone at my door.
Yeah.
Yoo-hoo, coming. To suffer non-physical preferences is to be prisoner of a captor never realized. To tolerate non-physical preferences is to flog yourself helpless with yourself, with your mind, which is not yourself, which in fact is not even yours. To accept and act on non-physical preferences is to be prisoner of a captor who you never recognize, yet who passes himself off as you. The mind, a terrible thing to waste yourself on.
Yeah.
Oy vey, y'all. Passion. The trick with passion is to only be passionate about those few things that actually require passion. Cows and sheep aren't dumb animals in that they depend on one another for physical survival. And in a similar vein, neither are men stupid, inasmuch as they rely totally on one another mentally. Moo if you get it. An overlooked aspect of life's mortal highway is that when it comes to ignorance, there is no passing lane. Bleat if you love Jesus. And just about the time that the ordinary believe that things are disconnected, things seem to prove them right. A mystic will take all the help he can get. A mystic will take all the help he can get, especially from himself. A mystic will take all the help he can get, especially from anywhere. A mystic will take all the help he can get, which especially works best when he can immediately forget where it came from and use it only once and move on. One of the reasons that men do not realize the full nature of the mind is that in external matters, comparably speaking, it can be exact and faithful to reality, while regarding internal ones, it cannot, but mentally imposes the former ability over the latter failure, resulting in the illusion of similar success. Sorry. Not unlike the captain of a ship, who can take precise sightings of the oceans, but cannot tell when he himself is seasick. Those whose existence is less centered around thinking have fewer complaints with themselves and more with life than do those in whom thinking is the focus of their existence, who have many complaints with themselves and feel them more proper than any directed at life. Simply another view of differences between the least civilized and those more so. And yet once more, a certain way of looking at it. You can either try and be still in a storm or be active amidst quietude. And as always, it should be noted, their ultimate difference is open to question. Perhaps best addressed by the old-timers who had put it, it's all a matter of whether you know what you're doing and actually do it or not. Question. If local reality is whatever the mind says that it is, then is reality as easily changed as simply changing the descriptions thereof? Did I actually say as easily changed? And now, one man's personal and private question to himself. Is the feeling that you're coming apart proof that you are coming apart? One man said, I am sorely, sorely tempted. And life, in that non-aggressive tone unique to it, laughed. My God, mused a bystander to the affair, what lessons we could learn from life. Fish got to swim, birds got to fly, and the water and air be unaware. 'Tis man alone with the potential to comprehend the environment within himself. A boy once asked his father, is there a whole range of different emotions we experience, or only one that different people experience in their own way, which gives rise to the thinking that there is a whole range? His papa started to hit him with a weed whacker, but decided it was too good for him. If what you know is tied to time, there is the chance you are deluded. For how can you be certain that the dead do not dread the thought of life? If what you know is tied to time, there is the chance you are deceived. A perceptive man looks not too far ahead nor too far behind. A perceptive man looks directly at what he wants to see, which may be out of sequence, which may be out of time. Who is to say that the ignorant may not dread the idea of knowing? The way things generally are. The body makes effort, but the mind does not. The way things are generally thought to be. Otherwise. And yes, yet another description of the two approaches. You can either put your finger on the trigger or leave the gun on the shelf. During the Silassagus age on one planet, there lived a mighty mystical teacher who was referred to at his own insistence by his fans and close friends as the pea-brained migrant worker. A man said, I have thought and cannot think any more. To which his mind replied, chump. The impropriety of the Flying Dutchman to announce his destination should be obvious by now. There was once a man who swallowed a chrysalis and expected to produce a butterfly. And in such a misguided condition do men remain even today. One father said this to his son, there are a couple of ways you can think about the discovery of the truth about life. One way is to picture life bending over and dropping its pants and you see it for what it is. And another way is to imagine life bending over and dropping its pants and what you see is you. And still another way, but the lad waved for the old man to stop, mumbling that he wasn't up to hearing another one right now. As the old-time mystics used to say, yee-haw, enough's enough and too much is minimum, if you don't bust a gut doing it. The mind in wine seeks to withdraw itself to such a point that there is nothing left but the alcohol. The consciousness of the ordinary softly cries, make me less, make me less. A sign that could be placed in cities, but is not. The danger in telling other people what to do is that they may do it. The non-danger in telling other people what to do is that if they do it, it won't make any difference. Most cities are pretty particular about what signs they allow. Whenever he'd do or say something stupid, one guy would offer this follow-up comment. Well, that's why there are erasers on pencils and why our dicks are at the other end of our body from our brains. It's not clear what good this remark did him, but he'd say it just the same. Between the eras of Zoroaster and Buddha in a land now forgotten, appeared a mystic whose life history has left unnoted. A mystic, like others before and after, who was tried and condemned for the opposition his ideas presented to the status quo of his day. And this one, as he was being led away, was heard to say, "Oh, I was born a coal miner's daughter. I was born a coal," showing once again that when it comes to what's remembered, time and place are everything. Oh, I was born a coal miner's daughter. 'Tis only an ordinary man who understands nothing, who feels superior to others. The greatest present is ignorance, such as being in prison and not knowing it. One man had a dog he kicked around, and a friend said, "I wouldn't treat a mine that way." And they both suddenly got it. Question: why do men talk about curing physical ills and only treating non-physical ones? There was once a man who went off walking on the great mystical quest, only to finally discover the secret at the end of his own foot. One man finally got life on the phone, and he asked, "How much longer can this go on?" And life replied, "That's according to exactly what you're referring to." And the man said, "Don't try and pull any more of that evasive crap on me. Just answer the question. How much damn longer can this go on?" And this time, after a moment of silence, life said, "Well, if you actually understand what you believe that you're asking me, I'll give you a straight reply." To which the man immediately responded, "You're damn right I know what I'm asking." So life thus continued. Then look in your own mind, right this very instant, for there resides your lack of certain efforts, which results in your feeling that what is transpiring in your life is intolerably indeterminable, and the irresistible goodwill that comes with the plain recognition of the truth overwhelmed the man's face, and all he could do was grin ear to ear and chuckle softly back to life as he gently hung up the phone. A mystic told his followers, "I am a fraud." And they replied, "What difference does that make?" In fact, that cannot be. Only an ordinary man who does not know what he is can truly be a fraud. You and your health. Only one thing makes a conscious man ill. Within this sort of activity is an ever-present possibility of a type of non-physical incest. And as with everything else in life, It is only a problem when it is not recognized. Okay, now that it's been said, let's say it this way. Within the mind of man is the ever-present threat of incest with self. And while such activity propagates the collective mental life of man, it produces no promising offspring for the few. The enemy, he can only get you as long as you don't see him. Maybe the day will come when you'll have even greater appreciation for that man who asked life, how much longer can this go on? Only ordinary minds are confused when they hear that the awakened are without passion. When the simple think about improving themselves, they think about changes in their behavior. When the more sophisticated think about such, they think about acquiring more knowledge. Only those born to the struggle know what real change requires, and 'tis served by neither of the above. And the two teams in the shouting debate commence the contest once more. It's too simple. It's too difficult. It's too simple. It's too difficult. It's too simple. It's too difficult. And here we shall take our leave, their continuing lack of progress toward resolution being obvious. Son, yes, Dad. Don't look back in anger. Yes, Dad. Son, yes, Dad. Don't look back in regret. Yes, Dad. Son, yes, Dad. Don't look back with uncertainty. Yes, Dad. And son, yes, Dad. Above all, yes, Dad. Don't ever look back. To the more conscious, anything that happens naturally doesn't count. And above all, yes, Dad, never look back. Again, consider another way to look at two lives men lead. While that's generally in order to make some warning about the ad hoc nature of dividing up life, men and life, into two categories, three categories, two always being the most common, it is not, even with such warnings and that having some basis in reality, it is not without some cause that it seems proper. Because no matter what various scenarios I could dream up and saying man live like a life of the mind and a life of the body, a primary life and a secondary life, a life of survival and a life of technology. There is a basis for it, because we do indeed, had man never even thought up any such descriptions, we do live two lives simultaneously. In fact, I should have made up a fairy tale by now. Maybe I can do it a little few split seconds before I'm talking. There should be a fairy tale that at one time, before this present universe existed, life produced another one that gave birth to this one. But in the original version, in the first version, humans indeed, what turned out to be humans, did live two very specific, simultaneous, separate lives. Simultaneous. And that everyone on the planet Earth, what was Earth at that time, that everyone on that planet had the ability to shift their attention and to see the other life besides the primary life, besides the ordinary life, what you would think of as our ordinary life even today. That they had the ability to shift their mind and to see that there was another life going on. Now, not another life in the sense it was some sort of spiritual life outside of them or alien forces or the spirits of the dead. What I'm saying is that they were living two simultaneous lives at two different levels, and that they all had the ability, if they wanted to, that they generally lived the kind of life that we do. That is just a life that whatever you think of it as being, you just kind of stumble through and you live and you sweat and you rest and you play and you cry and you up and down, and it's just no great thought about it. But that there was another life, and if they wanted to, they could see it going on simultaneously. They could see it. There's a way now that is not without useful basis, and it's not all symbolic or metaphorical. That if you look upon the human mind, not from theory, if you look at it on the basis of what it does, how it operates, how it has affected life, then you can come to conclusions that seem obvious. They're not normally considered, but that are simply obvious and bypass. They shortcut any theory, any supernatural explanation. You simply look at what goes on with the human mind, and you could see that it lives, in a sense, two different lives. If you just take your skin itself as being the cutoff point, and that outside, just what we'd call the external world, that is one of the worlds that the mind lives in, deals with, and then inside the skin, the internal world. If you look at all the evidence, if you just look at life, you can see that the greatest impact on life as you know it, which is life on this planet, the greatest impact, it's not even a debate, the greatest influence and impact made upon life on this planet has been the human mind. It is easy to see that the life of ordinary man would not resemble what it is now, were it not for the human mind. Again, it requires no speculation, because there are extant at this time on this planet people living at bare subsistence level, and it's obvious from a more civilized level, from the developed countries, that they look upon these other areas and they see what is lacking. They would probably call it technology, but what they're referring to is that the mind's participation in the external world. That is the difference between people living hand to mouth, dying within the average age being 30 years of age, them still wearing themselves out through physical labor, and people in other countries wherein the mind has had a greater impact on the external world, they simply look at it and realize that if you had such and such, if you would start using electricity, if you would make use of this and that, the things easily, readily available on this planet, your life would change dramatically. Dramatically. Within months, you would be living longer. Your health would be better, etc. The point is, this is not a theory. It's not open to any debate. It's a fact. If you look at it beyond that, we get into a realm that no one ever considers. Well, let's establish, I assume that you can see, that if the mind did nothing other than deal in the external world, manipulate the environment, change the physical way in which men live, develop machines to take labor off man's muscles, his back, which of course has been the primary benefit that technology, that the mind has brought forward, that's made physical life much easier, extended physical life. All the medicines, every aspect of civilization is simply a development, is a product of the mind, not the body, product of the mind, and the body has benefited. Again, you should have no trouble, even an ordinary person, to accepting the fact that you can take a second and consider, but that has been based upon the operation, not on theory, not on speculating that gods or somebody sent man here and made his mind, simply based upon the observations that you can make in your everyday life, that you can sit there and reflect upon. There can't be any doubt that that is at least an extremely important job, task of the mind. If you are the least bit intelligent, you can ponder it a couple of more seconds and should be able to agree with this, that I say it is not one of, it has surely, based upon observation, based upon life as you know it, that it is the primary job of the mind. Shouldn't take but a second and you think about it, and there's no doubt about it. Ordinary people, in fact, let's assume that they would agree. And if I said, well, by the way, you people who nodded that you agree, what is the alternative? What is the other operations of the mind, the other activities of the mind, which would be, as opposed to the manipulation of the external world? It was obviously be, by my description, which is not prejudiced, is not ill-founded, then we're talking about internal matters. When you people nodded that did nod, and when I said that surely, without any doubt, just observation tells you that dealing in the external world is the primary job of the mind. And you go, yeah. Then to say the primary leaves open the alternative, or leaves open by such a definition, an alternate world, some alternate activity. And it would obviously be, in the case of the preposition that I have proffered, it would be the internal world. So I could ask an ordinary person, so what is the internal world? That if we see that the external world has been, the mind's involvement in the external world has been to change the face of the planet, to change the physical environment to suit man, rather than man in some way having to adapt to the environment. That he has changed physically the external world to make life more physically efficient, more physically comfortable for him, then what is the internal version of this? What would people say? Tempted to stop and just walk off and leave it there. What would people say? Now, you know, intelligent people, assuming they followed that, ordinary people, they would have to respond, because they know there is some response, because they know that their mind operates inside their head. And they never analyze it in any way, but if I said, are you sure that your mind is doing something internally? People go, well, sure, I know that. I was just hesitating trying to think the way to answer your question about what is it specifically. But if I said your mind actually operates, do you understand what I'm saying? That you can see in the external world, that it operates out there because it will change things. It will invent things, change technology. It changes the environment to suit the human body. And people, the mind, this ordinary person go, yeah. And I go, so there we can see manifestations. Electricity, clothes, synthetic fibers, there is physical proof of the human mind making life easier. That we have clothes so we don't have to continually move out of adverse climatic conditions, moment to moment. We can simply put on a heavier coat. We can turn on heat. And the ordinary mind go, yeah, all right, I see that. There's lights, TV. There are physical manifestations. But if I said, give me a physical manifestation, not material, but give me a literal, something that we can describe, manifestation of the mind involved in the internal world, what would people say? I never thought I'd come up with a question I couldn't answer. Oh, we all know. All you got to do is check your own mind. Your own mind will go, oh, yeah, that's something. And after what? You know what? I assume that they'd probably say, I'll be somewhere in the ballpark. They would say something like, well, I think. You know, that's not a response to the question. Because the mind thinks, it obviously thinks, as witnessed by what it's done to the external world. Yeah, but, I think about things. Well, we've established that. The mind obviously thinks about things because it has changed things out there. But I'm asking you, I'm still playing both parts. I'm asking you, I'd say to an ordinary mind, ordinary person, give me some description of what it has wrought, what it has produced, or just describe the activity at the times when your mind is not directed its focus, its attention on the external world, when it is turned on itself, when it's turned internally, not on itself, when it's turned internally. Describe to me what it is. What would they say? What would you say? Again, assuming they're following my line of questioning and reasoning, strike reasoning, of course, my line of questioning, I guess they would probably then have to say, well, I think about me. I think about who I am. I think about what I want out of life. But then they'd begin to warm up. Yeah, that's it. Me. I think about me. I suspect that is about as good as we would hope for, that they would probably, even if I gave them some additional time, if I said, well, does that one description satisfy you? In other words, I gave you the first description. I said that the mind deals in external affairs in the external world and in the internal world. Obviously, we would say, and everybody goes, yeah. So I went ahead and described the external world. The easy way to describe it is technology. That there is the proof, there is the evidence, there is the manifestation, there is all you need to know. It describes really everything. You can break it up into smaller parts, but just say technology. That is things that did not naturally occur on this planet. Nobody ever dug a hole and found an organically growing television camera. Nobody ever found a light bulb growing from a tree. That is technology. They are all products of the mind. They would not be here were it not for the mind's operation to direct the hands of man to the external world, to do things out there. And so I gave them that description, and I said, but there are things that the mind does that does not result in the hands doing something. Mm-hmm. When it's turned inside. And everybody go, yeah. And I say, all right, well, give me an example. What? I gave you television, synthetic fibers, automobiles, electricity. That's obvious, but give me an example of internally, when the mind turns to the internal affairs. What?
Collar.
What?
Jacket collar.
As long as it was something important. What would they say? And I would suggest that if they rambled around, they would finally have to get down to the point of just saying, well, I think about me. That sounds irrefutable. But what I'm going to point out specifically is this. In one sense, in one quite valid sense, people do not think about themselves. They do not think about themselves in the one sense, in the one fashion that makes people have a self. That is the mind. Now, people think about their body, but if you'll assume I'm not in a verbal wrestling match with you, that is still the mind thinking about the external world. The mind now. Because I know people think, my collar's turned up, I look ugly, I'm overweight, my hair is too thin, my nose is too big. Now, that certainly with ordinary people qualifies as them thinking about themselves. But again, I will certainly assume with you people, and I'll go ahead and assume rhetorically for my ordinary man, that I could point out to them that that's not, I understand what you're saying, and yeah, you're thinking about the size of your nose, you're thinking about you wish you could lose weight, okay. But now come on, we're civilized people, you're an intelligent person. When I say the internal world, surely you mean something other than that. And I would expect that an ordinary, civilized, educated man would go, well, you're right. If nothing else, I'd sort of shame them into admitting, well, thinking about your weight and whether you ever afford a hair transplant, that doesn't qualify much as the mind thinking about the internal world. Come on. And they'd probably go, well, you're right. And I'd say, so push it a little bit. That's when they would have to say, well, I think about me. And if I encourage them a little, they would probably finally say that they reflect on themselves, that they think about their desires in life. They try to think about their attitude toward people. They try to think about their morality, perhaps even their mortality. It all sounds good. Here it is, I'll go ahead and put it simply. It is almost a non-thing for the mind to do the one alternative to thinking about the external world, to being the external world. It is almost a non-entity that the mind thinks about itself. Now I'll go ahead and jump way beyond the examples of me talking to ordinary men. Let's take what, if they were sharp enough, if they would give enough time, somebody would come up with this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. Look at all of the apparent exceptions or possible exceptions to what I just said. I'm telling you that it is almost a non-thing for the mind to turn literally, internally, to the one place that there is an internal, and that's itself. Regardless of men saying, well, I think about me and all that. We're going to go past that. What would be the two greatest examples that would appear to be an exception? In fact, they would cover about all exceptions that ordinary minds would ever come up with. And I'll go ahead and do it for you, and it would be philosophy and psychology. Philosophy, you should be able to see through pretty easily, because you can read what little you have read, or you can go read more, but I can go ahead and tell you. The philosophers that said that they were pondering the weighty questions of human existence. What are these weighty questions? What do they get down to? There have been only one or two glaring apparent exceptions. There have been several men of some repute, that's not what they're remembered for as a matter of fact, but that have made some attempt to try and ponder what is the nature of the mind. But it always ends up, even the few attempts that have been made of any historical significance from ordinary views. That is, men who's wrote some attempt and it's still remembered. If you have any knowledge of it, it did not stay upon the mind for any length of time. It was like they'd start off and say, what is the nature of the human mind? And no offense to the people, because they did only that which was possible. It only took a sentence or two, and they were then reflecting upon what their mind thought about of external affairs. That is, not what the mind is, we go, what is the mind? And I'm not quoting anybody in particular, but there's been a few attempts. Somebody would say that they have decided after studying philosophy or all the great thinkers of the world, they decided to one thing left that must be studied, that a man must, to be truly wise and to truly be called a philosopher, he must look at the human mind. So the guy sits down or goes off in the woods and says, what is the human mind? And he starts things like, well, the human mind is that thing which conceived the idea of politics. And he's often running on politics. Do you follow? I'm not being sarcastic. It does not stay on the mind. But there are a few books, a few treatises that's been left that says reflections, whatever they're called, reflections on the nature of the human mind. The title's about it. After that, all I can do is the human mind, the human mind. Is it only the human mind that can perceive beauty? Ah, beauty. What is beauty? And it's all gone. The other exception, the other apparent exception would be psychology. What is psychology? I'm not sure what the current clinical or academic definition, but it was supposed to be in the study of the human mind. I think it was human behavior is probably what they call it now. But at any rate, you would think, let's take Freud, considered to be the turning point, one of the turning points in Western civilization, and there was a variation of it in Eastern. But anyway, let's take Freud. Man of obvious intellect, wrote much, quite verbal, intellectual, adroit, considered to be the father of modern psychology. It all worked out that all the other sciences the hard sciences were developing. Late 1900s, it seemed time finally. We're making all kinds of breakthroughs in the study of zoology, biology, the earth sciences. What was left? It was time, by God. It was time. And history brought a man, the treatment of mental illness had been around for years, thousands of years. Used to, they'd stone crazy people and they'd lock them up and all kinds of things. So in a sense, they'd always been treating them. But here came a man that apparently decided that there is something much deeper here with my hysterical patients, people with mental problems. And it's about time, what he seemed to represent, whether he ever said this or not, but it's looking back historically now, he is now accepted as being the man who happened to be in the right time, the right place, that he decided, it's time we have got to bypass all these things of evil spirits and vapors, and we have to study directly the human mind. And what did he study? He studied other people. For the second time tonight, I should just close the case and walk off and pick it up, what I was going to say on a more forward note. But that you either get or you don't. It either strikes you, and it's no sarcasm, no attack on Freud. It's psychology in general. But here it is, picture it, because what we're talking about is the human mind. We're not talking about Freud, and we're not talking about psychology. We're talking about the nature of the human mind, which is not normally talked about. Here it is, picture it. Let's go ahead and give him all sorts of internal thoughts. So he did decide, literally, himself, he thought, it's time for the human mind. Maybe it hit him that's it. The rest of this stuff interests me. The things I studied in med school and whatever courses they called psychology back then. But he decided, by God, here I'm a professional man. I've got an income. I got time to do it. I've got the interest. I've got patience. I'm going to study the human mind. Now remember what we started out. I said the human mind, by observation, you can see that it lives dealing with external affairs, interested in external affairs, or internal ones. And everybody will say, yeah. And then I told you after that part of that's an illusion. And here it is. We seem to be up to the point that would defy me saying that's an illusion, because here psychology is born as a science, the study. Let's go back and call it what it would have been originally, the study of the human mind rather than behavior, but the study of the human mind. I mean, it seems the time had surely come. Several thousand years of Western history. And what did the man do? Now remember, we're not talking about Freud, we're talking about the human mind. But here the man sits down and he decides, here is my field. Here is what I am after. Here is the last, or the new, or the great frontier. This is the area. This is it. And he's all excited. I will study the human mind. I'll start tomorrow as soon as Miss SP comes in. Do you hear me? It is, well, I don't know what else to say to you. I could say that, I guess, for some reason to an ordinary crowd of people, and they would draw absolute blanks. Especially unless they could sense I was trying to attack Freud. But they would draw an absolute blank. If I said, here it is, the man's ready, he got the mind for it, he got the training for it, he's got an office, he's got a suit, he's got a cigar, he's got a beard, and he's got an interest. I will study the human mind. Miss Perkins, send in my next patient so I can study the human mind. That is not studying the human mind. And you either see it or you don't. You're back, it might as well be technology. His mind looked out. And to say, well, I'll study the human mind, send in the next patient. It may as well, literally. For what we're talking about, it may as well have been a white mouse. It might as well have been a man back in a laboratory setting, playing with mice and mazes. There is no difference, literally, on the level that we're speaking of a man understanding the mind. You cannot understand, you're not studying the human mind if you're studying somebody else, even if you call it their mind. You're not studying the human mind if you say, yes, I'm studying her mind. Lay down, Miss Perkins, and tell me your dreams last night. You can do it forever. You can make a reputation. You can be called the father of modern psychology. You can be called a psychologist. That is not the study of the human mind. Now, again, you either see it or you don't. I can point out, notice that no one can understand the human mind. They collect more and more information. Of course, the human mind always has a story for it. I'm working on it. And if you say, well, are you making progress? They go, the mind says, making progress? Are you an idiot? Are you crazy? Don't you keep up? I go, well, I'm not really. They say, well, all right. It's only been, my God, 90 years ago, the annals of Western psychology amounted to this much. It was like, at least in Western Europe, there was less than 2,000 pages of actually trained medical men written on psychology. And nowadays, look over at this library. Do you realize there's a whole wing of that library that's full of nothing but the latest psychological, statistical findings and research? And you can't say the mind, that wasn't the question. Do you understand the human mind? We're working on it. What the hell do you think that is? We're working on it. And not one person, not one psychologist is studying his own mind. Not one. And you don't have to be a psychologist to know it, and you don't have to take that as an attack on psychology. It is almost a non-activity on this planet at any time, in any field, for a person to turn their mind on their mind. If you said that to an ordinary mind, they will deny it. The more civilized, educated they are, if you really pushed it and they didn't just walk off, they would vehemently deny it. And they'd be astounded that you appeared to be fairly intelligent and insist on such a folly. Does not your mind daydream all the time? Does not your mind run constantly? Yes, it does. Well, what do you want? How can you say I don't think? Lest I forget it, I wrote a news item, and I want to say before we finish, I may not be through with this, but there is, I know it read in a perhaps fairly complicated manner. I'll start reading it. Maybe I can rewrite it as I do it. One of the reasons that men do not realize the full nature of the mind, what I'm talking about now, that people do not do it, is that in external matters, comparably speaking, when the mind is turned on external matters, it can be exact and faithful to reality. Mathematics, and not just abstract mathematics on paper, mathematics is applied to engineering. That the mind, of course the hands build the bridge, but that the mind can sit and thinking, can plot, plan, design a bridge that people put their lives on the line by crossing the bridge. They can build skyscrapers, can build tunnels under the English Channel. The hands do it, but you know the hands could have not done that. The mind did it. So in external matters, comparably speaking, the mind can be exact and faithful to reality. While regarding internal ones, it cannot. There is nothing comparable to that kind of technical, mathematical, logical exactness. There is nothing comparable. Again, it's something you can see, it's not a theory. But here it is. It mentally imposes the former ability, that is the ability, since the mind can. In other words, the mind can we'll be putting a space probe landing on Mars shortly. That the mind can sit here and send something out on another planet, do all kinds of variations of make it fly a certain way, make it land. The mind can do that exactly, make it land on a dime on another planet. Now that's exact. It is. That the mind can do that with external matters, but it cannot internally. But what it does is it imposes the former ability, the ability to do it out there, And no one analyzes this as part of the makeup of the mind. It takes that ability, which is without question. It can do it. It can deal with reality. It can, to such a degree that you can put your life on the line by somebody else's mind, that they have developed a piece of machinery, an operational procedure, built a bridge, and you can trust your life because their mind could deal with, and they were faithful to reality. And they were exact down to little millimeters, or else the thing would have collapsed. It takes that ability. It just happens. It's part of the, and it imposes it on the internal. What little it looks at itself, not the mind, but just at the internal operations. And it takes that ability and it just assumes that it has that same kind of exactness and ability to faithfully detail and reflect reality, things as they are internally. And it just whistles and goes along. And again, it's not a theory. People know that that's not true. They know, I mean, it's reflected in everyday affairs. They do not call psychology a science, as a matter of fact. They call it a social science. No educated person would begin to equate psychology with engineering, with physics, with mathematics. Everybody knows it. But nobody makes anything particular out of it. It's like, well, we just, it's a little complicated. We're working on it. It will never happen. Because the mind, what they're doing, they're not turning the mind on their mind. They turn the mind on behavior. As I said, I believe now that I said it, that the current definition of psychology is the study of human behavior, not the study of the human mind. I'm not sure anybody uses that philosophy, maybe somewhere, but by now you must know the human mind, the most active endeavors going on now is neurology into the brain. And the most common cry here now, or the cover for it is, well, it's about time we actually studied the human brain, because if we can pin that little sucker down, there, I think we may have an entree into studying the human mind. So, that can be stalled for another 200 or 300 years probably. The mind is not situated, it's not arranged for the mind to turn and look at itself, to study itself. And even when it says it does, it'll call, bring in the rats, bring in the next patient. And they'll say, well, I'm studying that woman's mind laying there on my couch. I'm studying this patient. I'm studying his mind. Again, you either see it or you don't, and there's nothing you can say about it. They say, I'm studying his mind. I'm asking him, tell me your dreams. Tell me what's on your mind right now. And the guy's writing it down. Nothing strikes you. If he wanted to study the human mind, all you got to do is go home and sit down. You don't need an office. You certainly don't need someone else. You're not studying the mind when you ask somebody, all right, tell me your thoughts today. What did you dream last night? That's what this is.